What would you like to see change in your life? And what is the biggest obstacle that you're facing now? I run 2 programs called Inner Knowing and Good Life Designed for serious individuals who are ready to take the next step in their personal and professional lives. I will personally be coaching a small group of individuals on tools and frameworks for creating an intuitive practice and for creating self mastery in their life. As someone who's helped countless entrepreneurs open doors of possibility that they never thought existed, I've seen these strategies transform people's lives. The best part is that you'll 10x your output, unlock your creative genius. I'll work with you weekly to overcome your limiting beliefs. I'll teach you how to create clarity, processes, develop your intuition, and set a new framework on how to live your best life. And you'll get access to guided meditations that I have personally created that are not available anywhere else. We'll create a new self-concept that you can practice moving forward. This method is so effective that even if you don't have a lot of time or if you think you're not ready for a change, these frameworks and methodologies will still work for you. You can check out the link in the show notes to join the waiting list, and you can also check out what some of the previous clients had to say about our time together. It's first come, first serve, and I hope to see you there. Hi, my name is Yasmin Tarehi, and this is Gateways to Awakening, where we host one-on-one conversations with leading experts in wellness, well-being, and spirituality. On today's episode, I speak with James Ferrigno, who is a dating and relationship coach, writer, teacher, California certified intuition medicine practitioner, performer, and business owner. He helps men and women connect with their true selves to become successful in dating, relationships, and all other aspects of their lives. He teaches clients practical techniques to uncover and begin to feel their emotions so that they can engage authentically with themselves and others. And I'm so excited to welcome James to the show. We actually graduated from the same program, the Academy of Intuition Medicine. And so I am delighted to welcome him to Gateways to Awakening. So welcome, James.
Thank you, Yasmin.
So James, to kick it off, why do so many women misunderstand men?
Well, I think it really all goes back to the lack of initiation process in the dominant culture of today. And if you look back in history, for as far as we know, since the beginning of human culture, there's always been a initiation process in almost every culture, and throughout the all of history this existed. And somewhere in Western Europe in the Middle Ages, it started to degrade and become less and less of an initiation process, and through the Renaissance. And I've even watched through my lifetime the remnants of what was left of the initiation process fall away, so that now we're left with very, very little. Though women still have a little bit more than men do. But really neither is up to the task of teaching people how to have relationships. In the initiation process of most cultures, it was almost always included how to interact with the other gender, how to have relationships, how to look into yourself and be aware of your own emotions, how to interact with both yourself and others. And that's something that's frankly lacking most places. There's some remnants of it in some places, but mostly it's gone.
And James, can you actually define or describe what the initiation process is? We've got like 70 plus countries listening in. So for some folks, maybe that terminology might not be so easily understood. Yeah.
So it's something that varies from society to society and culture to culture. It can vary pretty widely. It's been through time. But it usually, not always, but it will usually include some amount of time for a young person. It usually occurs somewhere around adolescence, somewhere between ages, 9 and 16. And it usually includes that person spending some time alone maybe some time in nature, could be some time sitting around a fire and staring into it, or surviving in the wild by themselves, or just spending a night at the top of a mountain, or it could be a lot of different things, but some time alone somewhere, in a sweat lodge somewhere. And it usually also often includes division by gender, and the older people of that society teaching the younger people um, of their gender. And it also tends to include emotional aspects of how to uncover things within oneself. And it also tends to include lots of information and uh, tools to be able to interact with the other gender, and how to get a mate, how to whatever that culture happens to have. So it could be, usually it's preparation for some kind of marriage, some kind of connection, some kind of family building. And it's just told, this is how we do things. This is how you approach the person. This is how you negotiate things. This is how you talk. These are things you say. These are things you never say. And um, a lot of the cultures also include information on sexuality, and not just, and it could be safety things, but practical things. It really runs the gamut of what it could be. But most of those things are included to some degree usually. And there's still some of that in some cultures, but I know like the mainstream kind of Western European culture of the world contains very little of that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so interesting. I think a lot of people learned about relationships through either their family or their parents. In many cases, for folks of our generation, not great role models, since the
Hmm.
divorce rate is so high, right? And I think also we've learned about our sexuality in school, which at times felt clinical and traumatic, for many people. So I completely agree with this initiation piece, and I'm like also reflecting on how different the world would be if a lot of us in the West had gone through this experience of really moving into womanhood and manhood and all the responsibilities attached to that. So James, I want to talk a little bit about why so many men misunderstand women.
Hmm. So it's pretty much the same reason that they don't really have an initiation process, but there are some additional complications. Uh, Women, like say in mainstream Western European culture, women still do have a little more information than men, because women tend to talk to each other about relationships and emotions, and men have a tendency not to do that. And also, women have some resources. There are women's magazines, even something like Cosmopolitan or Marie Claire gives them some kind of information, and there is some good information in there. And whereas men don't really have that, and they don't have the friendships and the bonding and the connections with other men to be able to get information, and they don't have much in the way of uh, publications. And the internet has complicated this because it has actually made it worse than it used to be, because there used to be at least some publications that you could go to and rely on, but now with the complication of social media and websites, it's very difficult for people to tell if they're getting accurate information. It's almost impossible for most people to tell. So it's very unhelpful. Um, the information is out there, but if you've never started on the road, how do you know what the correct information is?
Right, right. Yeah,
So
absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah.
so it's really tough, and that's the position that most people are in. And I think men also in the dominant culture are taught to ignore their emotions. This is changing. This is especially changing over the last 20, 10 years, especially. But it's still the dominant thing that men, it's not acceptable to feel most emotions. Anger is it's acceptable in certain circumstances, not others. But most of the other emotions are not accepted. And even though there's some change, like in the media and in certain circles and at workshops and certain organizations, and people are told to be healthy, and there's people in therapy are taught things, but still the message from books and TV and film and the internet is that crying means you're weak. And if you have too many emotions, you're weak. In fact, this is what the a lot of men have used as a weapon against women over the centuries, saying that they're too emotional, which means simply that they have emotions and that they're expressing them in some way. And these same men also have emotions, but have been taught to disconnect themselves from them, so they're unaware of them. And I think the problem here is when you're unaware of your emotions, when you've been taught to either repress or suppress them, have a combination. Repressing is when it's outside of your awareness. Suppressing is when you start to feel it come up and you push it away. And since that's what's going on, these emotions don't go away. You still have them, but then when your emotions are outside of your awareness, you now no longer have control over them, and they really control you. They really run you without your awareness. And so you end up with men thinking they're being logical, thinking that they're so organized and that they don't get over emotional, when really their emotions are deciding everything for them, and they have almost no freedom themselves.
Yeah, like unprocessed emotions just like remain kind of in the unconscious, world, right? And so oftentimes it just gets expressed in different ways. I've seen that happen a lot.
Yeah.
And I'm curious. I'd love to talk about the three stages of male development. I know we briefly spoke about it, and also, the theme of why nice guys are the biggest liars. So maybe you
Mhm.
could walk us through those three stages.
So yeah, David Data, the author, came up with, and spiritual teacher, he came up with the three stages of masculine development model, and I think it's a really useful and good model. It's very very helpful when you're looking at this. Though I think in reality it's a continuum, so there's no real defining point from one to two or two to three. There's a transition between, so it's good to keep that in mind, that it's not a hard and fast rule or anything. But within this continuum, he's defined three stages. And the first stage is the traditional male, that these stages of masculine development are, something that not only do individual males usually go through, it could be a female going through this, so, or whatever gender, but generally it's men going through the masculine development, but it's also the span of history. The human race is going through these stages of masculine development as well, so it's happening on two levels. And in the past, the traditional male was one who was, that first stage male was one who was grounded, masculine, able to lead, able to take control, able to physically protect women or other men who weren't masculine, and but unfortunately had a less developed intellect, not much interest in subtlety or details or education, uh, was very domineering and was very prone to violence. And it was really just my way or the highway. So I can be strong and protect you, but you're going to do exactly what I say and when I say it. And that was the standard for masculinity for most of human history. And not that there weren't other, there were still stage two men then. There clearly is records of them being in ancient Greece and Rome. But that was the dominant thing, and certainly the leaders were that, and certainly the people making the decisions were those first stage masculine, and to in large part still are. And then somewhere of about, it's hard to track exactly, but I'd say probably 150 years ago or so, there started to be an increase. I think the race was evolving a bit, and there started to be an increase in the stage two. And the stage two, which is also known as the nice guy syndrome, stage two develops the other side. So stage two men tend to be not very grounded, not very good at holding space, not very good at leadership, not very good at stepping into tension. Really, it's the ability to like step into tension, to face something scary and to have the courage, and they tend to not be very good at that. uh, what stage two people did develop was more of an intellect, more of a subtlety, more of an open heart. So ability to emotionally connect, ability to have compassion for others, to really care about other people, which is stage one. The amount of compassion was very limited. Um, so it looks like a trade-off, but I think these more complex things are being developed. And now what we're seeing is the stage three man starting to arise, or at least the transition into that, where the stage two people, the nice guys, are starting to figure out how to be more grounded, how to be more masculine, how to be better leaders. And this is just in its very beginning stages. But there are some men moving towards that. And then when you get this solid level three person, that's someone to be reckoned with, because they have both qualities of the leadership, strength, and masculinity, and the qualities of the open heart and compassion and intellect and intelligence and wisdom. And this is the view. This story has been around for a long time in myth of the development of the third stage individual. That's the story in King Arthur and the Grail legend. This is the story of a man developing like that, and that's what the King Arthur's supposed to return to Avalon, and that return of King Arthur to Avalon is the development of the third stage man. And I believe in the Christ story as well, the return of Christ, the Messiah or whatever, the return is the development of the first stage man, in my opinion. Um, and it's in a lot of other myths. It's in the Lord of the Rings story. That is the last one, is the return of the king, and the symbol of the king the is really looking at that man who is strong but has heart. And this occurs in all kinds of stories throughout the ages. There's just been very few real people that could live up to that, but I think that's starting to happen.
I'm like thinking, oh wow, the Rolodex of that is pretty small.
Yeah, not too many.
Oh, I think that I've noticed that the younger generation of men have started to really embody that open heart, intellect, grounded, can step into the tension and not shy away from that. I want to talk about that point because I think it's so interesting, just stepping into the tension, and why so many men, especially the ones in the West who have evolved maybe in some other capacities, oftentimes get stuck in this second stage, and what it means to even be the nice guy. Like, why take on that persona?
Yeah. I think it's simply a stage of development, and I don't think they're necessarily stuck. They're just moving through that stage. So there's nothing wrong with it. It just has certain consequences, which are that nice guys like things to go smooth. They do not want any disruptions. They do not want anything going wrong at all. They want a quiet, peaceful space that they control where nothing happens, right? And that's why it really fits into the current modern model of the family, of just people sitting in a house on a couch, watching TV or video games or computer or something, not really doing anything, maybe wanting to be left alone too. And you see this with most marriages, like in the United States especially. I see this, but I see it in Europe and Africa and a lot of other places too, and Iran. um, the the man just wants to be left alone and doesn't want the woman to bother him, right? What will send a chill down his spine and strike fear into his soul is when a woman, his partner, his wife, comes to him and says, "We need to talk." that will freeze every bit of his being, right? And it's and that's a good thing for women to know, that they believe they're doing something just casual. Oh, we need to talk about this, and not aware the level of stress and fear that now arises in this person that you now can't talk to because they're way too afraid. And they'll pretend not to be afraid because they've been taught not to. So they'll act confident and not afraid, but they are. And they're not telling their partner that. So you have this incongruous thing, and it becomes very confusing for the woman. Because they don't realize what's going on with this person that's their partner.
Fascinating. So, what can maybe women do differently? And I just say this, because I think when men are stuck, or not, the word "stuck" is maybe not a good word, but moving through the second stage, how can we communicate with? It doesn't even have to be romantic, right? It could be even professionally. Like I've worked with men who are the nice guy as well. Like, how can we best communicate with men like that? Like, what would you tell someone's partner they were struggling with this?
Yeah, and it's good to understand too that the vast majority of men are nice guys. Most of them. I mean, they're somewhere on that spectrum. There are different types of nice guys, but they're almost all on that spectrum. There are very few. There's a few bad boy first stage people left, and almost no third stage. So, almost all of them are second stage. But yeah, when you're talking to us, realize how afraid they are of tension, really, because that's really the defining characteristic. And that's where the lying comes in, is because nice guys are able to compartmentalize. They're fairly intelligent or very intelligent. And so they can say one thing to one person to make them happy. They want to make everybody happy because they don't want there to be any disruption. And that in itself is a lie, because it's like they're being nice to people, right? They're nice. They're helping you carry your bags. They're cleaning the thing. They're doing whatever. They're trying to, be uh, really kind, right? And really helpful to everybody. But they're doing that so that the people won't bother them. They're also trying to
Mm,
bank it for the future. They'll be nice and take someone out to dinner, do things so that, okay, now they owe me, you know,
mm,
now they owe me some peace and quiet. They don't realize it doesn't work that way, so they're not going to get it. But they still try and bank. They still try and bank it. And I think it's realizing that they can say one thing to one person and the opposite thing to someone else, and in their head justify it and rationalize it and believe that they're a nice guy and that they don't lie and that they're totally honest. So almost all nice guys believe that they're completely honest and don't lie, but they're lying all the time, chiefly to themselves. So, but they will lie to other people. So it's good to realize that that's what's going on, and that if you catch them lying, accusing them of lying will not go anywhere. That that's not going to help, because they know for certain that they didn't. Even though this is where you can get the disconnect, is because you saw them do it, so they did it, but they know they didn't. So you're never going to come together on that, unless one of the people really sees the dynamic and understands what's going on. So it's being gentle with them is good, to get them to not be afraid, because then you can have a conversation. Um, and letting them know at the beginning, when you want to talk to them, that there's nothing bad happening and that you're not angry at them, and that if you get angry and yell at them, it's not, that also is not going to go anywhere. But that's true almost of any person at any time. That doesn't, yelling at people doesn't make good for good conversations. So yeah, and the other thing is helping them to realize who they are and where they're at, and that they what seems to be easiest for nice guys to see is that they can't be leaders, and that they can't get the women and the sex that they want. And so
mm.
they're very unhappy about those things. So that is a good way to reach them. Thus, my career.
Okay, amazing. And that's so many questions, James.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Why? Okay, so I actually want to double click on this point because I've been thinking and reflecting on it quite a bit. I was at Burning Man last year and attended this workshop called Emoticon, where women got to. Uh, by the way, I'm also speaking on behalf of heterosexual relationships because that's what I know. But the women in the room were able to uh, really share their rage and fury towards the masculine, and the men in the room were proxies for um, different, people in the women's lives. And
Hmm.
it was really powerful transmutation for all of us because we got to witness the sort of feminine wound that has felt
Hmm.
largely lied to, shut down, pushed aside, repressed. And the women in the room are sort of like, why are men so afraid of women's anger? We are afraid every day of our lives. We walk to our, we drop off our cars and go to our houses. And even that 2-minute walk, there's a little bit of fear in us, when
Hmm.
we're on the wrong side of the block at a certain time at night, we're scared. Like there's a little bit of fear. I'm not saying that in some cases a lot,
Hmm.
and in some situations that they're different, but we're always so like confused. Like why are men so afraid of women's anger? And also, if you really look at the data, the amount of violence that's happened from men towards women is significantly, like astronomically higher than women towards men.
Hmm.
Even in the relationship realm, the amount of, I think it was like in the Atlantic, there's an article that speaks to how nearly half of all murdered women are killed by their romantic partners. It's a new, not even new, it's a CDC report that really, speaks to domestic violence and how there's a lot of violence happening from men towards women. So again, to kind of conclude this point, women are so confused. Why are men afraid of women's anger if the data shows otherwise?
Okay, there's quite a bit to unpack there. So one is that since most men are nice guys are afraid of anything not going smooth. So nice guys are afraid of anger, period, no matter where it comes from. So they're going to be afraid of women's, men's, their own. They're afraid of all anger. So that is, well, that's just the way it is. So another point is that it's more helpful to look at that statistic um, because there's a difference between the stage 1 and stage 2 men. And I don't know, but my intuition tells me that most of the violence is going to be perpetrated by stage 1 men who are not afraid of women's anger. So now one would think it would be the majority would be them, even though they're the minority of men. They're because stage 1 men are very, violence is a way of life for most of them. It's just part of who they are. So that's gonna be pretty easy for them to do. Not that stage 2 guys won't do that. What'll happen there is they suppress everything for so long that they just explode at some point. And this is what happens when you don't. So even the stage 2 guys are just all men are just pushing all their emotions away. And it's like I liken it to like a boiling kettle, and you're just holding the lid on, and the steam is just building up and building up and building up over your life. Then some big thing will come in, or a little thing. Sometimes just the tiniest little thing will happen. I mean, most of us have seen this. Some little thing will happen, and the person will explode like it was the biggest thing in the world. They'll scream and break things. And it's like, what are they doing? This is completely out of proportion. And yes, it is out of proportion because they've been holding that in for possibly their whole life. And that's what people are doing, and that's the effect of not allowing your emotions and not feeling your emotions and not be taught how to. And in fact, taught the opposite, taught how not to feel them, to the point where most of it is just completely automatic and internalized, and the guys wouldn't have any clue on how to feel their emotions if you asked them to. That's why usually when you ask a guy how he feels, oh, I feel fine, I feel okay. The best you get usually is maybe one word: I'm sad, I'm happy. I mean, that's good if they can even say that. And where you can talk to a woman and she'll give you, 20 paragraphs on how she's feeling. And because she's aware of it, she can feel it. And this is where the relationships fall apart. And this is where the nice guys especially, lose their ability to connect with women and aren't able to attract women. Because they're unaware of their own emotions. So how can you ever connect to somebody else's emotions if you're unaware of your own? And this is that, women will see that men are emotionally unavailable, they're disconnected. It's like, well, because they can't be connected. If you ever felt they were connected, it was most likely either just a fluke or it wasn't really happening, more likely. Um, so this is why I work to help teach guys to learn these skills. And the first skill is to be able to ground and then, have some stability, and then start to feel your own emotions and start to be able to process and release those, and release the old ones and be able to feel the new ones.
What usually happens in that stage, James? Like when men are starting to feel their emotions, like what's sort of the journey for them?
Yeah, so it's what'll happen with some men, this happened with me, is just something in my development snapped and I started to feel them. So it just happened. Uh, there wasn't even really any reason for it. And it was a terrible, terrible, traumatic experience. Um, Initially, when I started to feel my emotions, I read all of them as fear because since I hadn't felt any of these emotions before, I was scared of them and I didn't know what was happening. I didn't know what they were. So I would even feel joy and it manifested as anxiety because I didn't know what that was. I'd never felt that before. It was scary. And it was a really tough transition for me. It took 10 years to really be able to start to really be able to feel my emotions. And I really was able to begin feeling them when I found a practitioner who taught me how to ground. And that changed my life. It changed everything. Because then once you ground, then you can start to handle feeling the emotions. When you're completely ungrounded and in your head all the time, like most nice guys are, especially someone who works on a computer or sits on a computer all the time, that really gets you in your head and doesn't spend a lot of time doing physical things. And then you're in this position where you don't know how to feel your emotions, but even if you could, your body and your
Yeah.
just energetic state can't handle it because you're not grounded. So the best thing for men to do is to learn to ground, second stage guys. Because then they'll have the capacity to be able to feel them. And if I would say, get a coach, a therapist, whoever there is that can help guide you through that process, because that will make it so much easier. Then it can be a pleasant, joyful process instead of a traumatic one.
Yes, yes, yes. Amen. Grounding, that's been a savior for me as well. Just being really embodied. I jokingly say I moved from San Francisco to Los Angeles. And when I was in San Francisco, I just noticed like a lot of people in their heads, super intellectual city, but a mentor actually said this to me. It seems like people are 10 feet away from their bodies, like, treating their bodies like it's their pet, like, come along, dragging them through. And I also felt on my recent trip there that a lot of my energy was in my head back in the Bay Area. And so it's interesting in our professional life, we're so focused in our head and sort of disconnected from our bodies. And then if we don't actively incorporate things into our life that allow us to be in our bodies, then it just becomes like a sort of half-lived experience of being human, right?
Hmm.
I really appreciate the work that you do. James, I want to talk a little bit about an article that you wrote, which was about the 4 issues that can cause modern relationships to fail. Curious what your perspective has been or shifted maybe since the pandemic, and what you've sort of seen as like repetitive issues that keep coming up over and over again with with the folks that you coach, and also how to move through them.
Okay. Yeah, I actually haven't read that article in a while, so I don't exactly remember what I wrote in there. But I can tell you what's happening now. So So the issues with relationships, yeah, I really do see the same things over and over again. And it's some of it I've gone over, but it's that there's this pattern that happens is one of them. And so you have what a person A and person B. Person A says something that is, I don't love this word, but I'm going to use it anyway because I don't have a better one. Says something that triggers the other person, usually without their knowledge. They don't know that they were triggering them. They didn't do it on purpose. And it usually it's just a trigger for the other person because of some trauma they have, because of some history. It's not anything that's actually inflammatory. It's just randomly happens to line up with some past trauma the person has. So then they get upset, right? Because they've been triggered. Now they'll get afraid. There's some level of fear will come up. Could be sadness or anger or whatever, but the anger is really just covering the fear anyway. But they'll start to have heightened emotions. And then when you have heightened emotions like that, especially fear and grief, your thinking gets fuzzy, and then you don't know. It's really hard for you to react compassionately to things. So, but then what happens next is that person B, it will, this is the automatic response of everyone. They feel like they've been attacked. They feel they've been judged, threatened, blamed. So they will do one of two things, which is defend themselves or blame and threaten back. And usually both. Usually first they'll defend themselves, then they'll start blaming the other person. Well, you did this. Well, you did it first. Da, 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 da. And this is just virtually everyone does it. And when they do that, then person A, who wasn't really upset at all, now becomes upset because now they're being blamed. And then they do the same thing right back. And then it's just and now instead of having a couple that are working together on something, you have enemies on opposite sides of the battlefield. You're playing tennis, you've put each other, you've set against each other, and now you're fighting. And no matter what it is that you're fighting, it's not going to resolve the situation because it can't be resolved by fighting. So what I try and do with couples is show them that that's what's happening, and to try to stay on the same side no matter what happens, even if you get really upset, even if you feel like the person is blaming you, which they maybe are and they maybe aren't. And it takes a bit of practice to be able to have that happen. But I have noticed that it takes two, right? It takes two to tango. So one of the people can be behaving like that, but it is possible if one person is really good, experienced at this, the fight can't happen if one person won't do it. If they just keep being compassionate, one person may keep, person A may yell and blame and threaten, but if person B stays grounded, stays with an open heart, they can kind of transfer that energy and just keep responding compassionately. And that person will eventually get tired, and they'll eventually start to feel the compassion, and then they'll calm down. But that takes a very high level of ability and skill to be able to do. But if each person can do it a little, that can work too, and it can certainly help. And but really, almost everything comes down to that one dynamic. I mean, is judgment and blame. And whether you're first to do it or second to do it, either way, it's the judging and the blaming of the other person for anything.
So, how do you deal with that, James, in your your own life?
So if it's to be careful, not to judge and blame. And the way to do that isn't to try and force yourself not to judge and blame all the time. The real way to do it is to set your intention not to do it, and to ground. It's really to use tools and techniques to be able to ground yourself, keep yourself stable, and to keep your heart open, and to have compassion for the other person, and to really realize when there's anger coming at me, when there's blame and judgment coming at me, that's a reflection of trauma and pain. It's interesting because people will, men especially, like, because women will cry and then you can be sympathetic towards them. Oh no, it'll be okay. And like our compassion comes out. But if the woman yells at you, you're like, hey, you start yelling back, right? But realizing that the anger and the yelling is the same as the crying, it's just a different manifestation of the same thing. It's the same
Mm,
pain. So it takes some skill to be able to read the anger as, you know, sadness, as pain and trauma. But with practice, you get better and better at it as time goes by. Um, so really keeping that place of compassion and really opening your heart and just staying grounded. And then if enough comes at you, like I know with me, at a certain point, there is a limit somewhere where enough can come at me that the temperature starts to go up and fear or sadness or anger or whatever comes up. So then it's knowing to take a break, having boundaries,
mm,
basically knowing that. And boundaries mostly consist of knowing when to leave. Um, I think that's my simple way of. There's a lot of misunderstanding of what boundaries are, and most people I've seen who think they're employing boundaries are actually trying to control the other person. Um, but really, it's about exiting the situation. But you can do that in a relationship by, oh, I need to take a break right now, so we'll come back in an hour and talk about it then once you've relaxed. So it's knowing to do that because then you can come back and start over. Um,
mm.
it's good to do that. So just be careful and be aware of yourself, especially when you're in a tough conversation or something that's important, to keep an eye on your own emotions and pay attention to what level you're at, and to have compassion for the other person. I really learned a lot about that. I used to teach special ed, and I had some very violent teenagers that would attack me, and it really gave me practice at having compassion for violence, on me. So, but it takes some practice to be able to do that. It works better if both people are being helped by a coach or therapist and shown the techniques and tools to be able to use together of how to stay on the same side. You can even put things down in front of you, like you can put your phone and go, this is the problem. Remember, the problem is external to us. It's not, because as soon as the problem moves into the other person, it's over, right? The problem has to be on the table. It has to be not inside either of the partners.
Mm. What are some of the like reasons that people that couples end up staying together and others, not staying together? What have you sort of seen? And I say this because I've been taking a look at the Gottman Institute research on
Mhm.
this, and yeah, I'm just curious, like what you've seen in your own coaching practice.
Well, the staying together, I don't think staying together necessarily equals success, or that leaving equals failure, I guess, to start with. So, a lot of relationships just run their course and are done, and it's the right thing for them to part ways. A lot of relationships stay together when they shouldn't, when there's no communication, no real connection, when it's not happening. They're staying out of loyalty, or because fear is a big one, or just because they don't want to be lonely, or because it's part of their religion or their culture, so it's not something that is really acceptable to do, and they're not willing to take that risk. So staying together isn't necessarily a good thing, and I think in a lot of cases, perhaps, mm, well, we'll just say a lot of people that stay together really needed to have moved on, or learned to have a healthy relationship versus an unhealthy one. And but as far as healthy relationships go, it's people who can communicate, who have a weekly talk about their relationship, who have structures in their relationship to for communication. I mean, who know the skills. Um, and it's not just the verbal communication, but also the compassion piece, like I said before, if you don't have compassion for the other person. And another piece, this is one thing that ends relationships, whether they actually leave living together or not, is not addressing things, triggers when they come up. Because when people don't address them and never share them, they will, nice guys are really good at this, they just bury it. And then it creates resentment. And then they bury the next one, and that's more resentment. And then someone yells at them, they don't say anything, and they bury it, and they have no boundaries, so they never assert their boundaries. If you never assert your boundaries and you just let the other person cross them every time, you build resentment. And eventually the resentment is so high that you can't stand them. Then you can't stand that person. And you'll either stay together in silence, break up, have some explosion on them. It's possible that could end in violence or, even death. When if you really keep building resentment after resentment and putting things on that pile for decades after decade, it can really build to a disastrous level. So you really need to share those things. You need to talk about them and air them out. It's interesting. I also see that one mistake that's made is I think it's a mistake. This is my belief, but it's better to air things out and not want the person to change. So say they have something that bothers you, you don't like them doing, right? They leave their dirty dishes in the sink or whatever it is. Rather than ask them to stop doing it, the thing to do is to have a conversation and just air it out, right? So, and say, I'm aware you're doing this thing, right? And I'm feeling this, and then share your feelings about it. And then it's really good. I found a lot of success in this. Is specific. You have to specifically remind them, I'm not asking you to change. I'm not asking you to do anything. In fact, I specifically do not want you to take any effort to try and change that. Because when you do, then that person's going to be doing something that they don't want to do. This is the problem with the traditional compromise thing. That compromise doesn't work, not in the way that people are doing it. So you can't compromise and then have to do this thing for this person because it's going to build the resentment. It's not good. So you tell them not to do that. So you just have it in your awareness and you just know that it bothers the person, and then that's it. And I've found that not always, but the majority of the time, the person will naturally cease doing the thing without trying. Not always, but the majority of the time. And it's just because it takes the energy out of it. It takes the pressure out of it. And and some magic happens and it all just improves. So it's about, and especially if the person's doing something internal, like judging or blaming you or doing something like that or yelling at you, then just telling them you're aware of it and telling them not to change. That's especially like the dishes example. Okay, they'll resent that, but you definitely don't want someone to they want to yell or they want to blame, and now they're like stifling it down and burying it instead because you've asked them not to. That is not good. So it's like, no, go ahead, keep doing it. Don't try to stop. But what will happen is that sharing, that emotional connection, that airing it out makes it so your partners, you're on the same page. You both know what's going on now. And it will just naturally connect you, and then you'll just naturally not do the thing. Because it's that disconnection that's created from compromising and not wanting to hurt the other person's feelings, and these things that we do that we think are the right thing. That's what's causing the problem. Not asserting your own boundaries, not wanting to hurt the other person's feelings, doing stuff for them that you don't want to do. And all these things are looked at as good, but that's where the disaster starts. And over years of that, it's not going to work.
Wow, so profound. Yeah, that's a really fascinating point about the resentment piece and not expressing one's opinions. I'm also curious, if you have shared, let's say that there has been a disagreement and the conversation, and there's been a conversation about the disagreement, but then resentment is still there. Like what then? If one person is still holding on to the argument or to the fight?
Well, it's good to show the person that. So if one person is, I guess it would depend on the exact situation. So if one person, say, wants the other person to change and they're not, which does happen sometimes, uh, then they just have to, well, then they have a choice to make. Then it's, is this relationship worth this thing I have to endure? And they have to really honestly decide that thing for themselves. They have to decide, to protect my boundaries, do I need to leave this person? Is this relationship over? Or can I live with this thing? And you have to really make the decision. And people don't want to leave sometimes, but sometimes if you really can't live with it, you have to leave. And you have to make that choice. Now, it's possible that thing could change at some point, whatever it is. It's like, but you have to decide. You really just have to be adult and decide. How is it worth it? Am I willing to wait? How much? How deeply do I love this person? How much do they support me? How much do they help me? What's the better choice?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I was talking to another relationship coach, and she spoke about requests versus requirements. So really being clear about like what is a request, what is like a nice to have, and what is like an absolute, especially early on in the relationship. And I think a lot of
Hmm.
people sometimes just confuse the two, and they don't make a very like solid distinction between what
Yes.
is, what's an absolute no versus I can handle that.
Yeah. The ones that are deal breakers. Yes, you're absolutely right. The beginning is the time to address those. Um, you really got to pay attention if you're starting to date someone or get serious with them. See if there's any deal breakers, and you have to be honest with yourself. Oh, but they're we really have fun together, and they're beautiful, and the sex is great. But wait, there's this thing I can't live with. It's like knowing, if that's really a deal breaker, then it's a deal breaker. Yeah.
Right, right, right. Absolutely. James, what sort of things have surprised you on this journey? Looking back at the coaching that you've done and sort of the journey that you've been on. In the you said it took a 10-year kind of journey for you to move into this third stage of male development. Curious, yeah, what has surprised you the most,
Surprised me about my own development.
or even just about what you've learned about the men that you've been coaching or the couples that you've been coaching?
Mm,
Surprised you about the nature of a relationship? It could also be your own kind of personal
mm.
reflections.
Oh, let's see. So many surprising things. One thing I think that really was an eye opener for me in the dating realm was that, uh, to be able to attract women is completely, for most, not all, but for the majority of women, it's irrelevant. Pretty much, if you're good looking, super fit, have money, are tall, all these criteria that guys always beat themselves up about, that they're not tall enough, they're not fit enough, they don't have enough money, and when they get those things, then they'll try and date. And it's that they're all irrelevant. They're all irrelevant. If you can be masculine and grounded and put a bubble around somebody and keep them safe and be a leader and connect with them energetically and connect with them emotionally and support them, that is so magical. I also want to point out how rare that is. That's another thing, I guess, that really surprised me, was the incredible experience of that connection, how profound it is and how rare it is. And I think it's something like the romantic comedies or whatever it is, Romeo and Juliet, about these people that just incredibly connect, and it's just this magical connection. And learning that may randomly happen a few times, but it's something you can learn to do. And especially the masculine, because the masculine initiates it. The masculine can learn to make that happen with the majority of women if he learns the skills. And it's a profound connection. Um, it's impossible to describe. I think it's something that the vast majority of people have never experienced, and It's quite incredible. And it's something that's so feels so good when you're going back and forth and talking to the person. Like I'll tell guys like to not attach to outcome, because the guys on a date are often thinking they're not present and they're not grounded because they're thinking about, wait, was the sex going to happen later? They're thinking ahead, right? So they're attached to the outcome and they're not in the present because they're thinking about the future. And the realization that, wait a second, this connection is so magical and so pleasant and so amazing. This is the sex. It's happening when we're sitting across the table at the restaurant. And that it this is it. It's right now. It's not something that's going to happen later in bed. That's part of it, but this is the first part. This is a different part of it, but it's just as magical and amazing.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. So, James, what do you want to tell our listeners about their well being, about relationships? Like, what's sort of your main takeaway, your call to action for everyone listening in?
Is to give everyone a break, especially yourself. Um, we blame and judge others, and this really destroys the relationships. But what makes our whole life a misery is the blaming and judging ourselves. I mean, no one is harder on us than ourselves in most cases. And really, watch your negative self-talk. Watch what you say to yourself, how you treat yourself. Watch your self-care, your boundaries. Treat yourself with compassion and treat others with compassion. And if you can really learn to ground, treat yourself and others with compassion, and learn to feel and release your emotions. If you can do that, you can do anything.
All right. I love that so much as a call to action and takeaway. And are there any resources that you can point folks to in order to learn more about you, about your work? Where can people find you?
Yeah, they can go to the website, which is Authentic Life 9. It's Authentic Life and then the number 9.com. And that is also if they want to contact me through Instagram, it's at Authentic Life 9. That's also the handle for YouTube, which is at Authentic Life 9. And they can also check out my articles on uh, Elephant Journal. I have 8 or 9 articles on there. And there's some great free tools in there. There's also some great meditations and things on the YouTube channel. And there's so many good resources out there. There's lots that aren't, but just my stuff, there's quite a bit. There's quite a bit out there. I have grounding exercise. You can go on YouTube, listen to it every day. It'll change your life.
Amazing.
And there's some releasing exercises there as well. And they can contact me through any of that. But go to the website and my current program is teaching guys how to authentically or energetically and emotionally connect with women, which most guys can't do. So I
Mm,
think that's really the key. So if you go to the
yes.
website, you can learn about that.
Yes. Thank you so much, James. This was so lovely. I really feel like I learned a lot, and I'm sure our audience did as well. So I hope a lot of folks listening will go and check out James's course and really take advantage of this material, because I think, our humanity sort of needs men to step into the true masculine. And I think you have an article about positive masculinity and toxic masculinity. So we didn't get a chance to cover that, but folks
Mm-hmm.
can go check out your article to learn more about that. Thank you so much for your time. And for our audience, thanks for joining and for listening. In this episode, we learn about why nice guys are the biggest liars and other stages of male development with James Ferrigno. You can tune into Gateways to Awakening, where we host one-on-one conversations with leading experts in wellness, well-being, and spirituality. Thanks again.